I think most of you will never have met our next guest before. That doesn't mean to say he doesn't go anywhere, although Guy will probably admit, although he only lives literally up the road, he rarely gets into London these days to investor events. So he does make his visits out fairly minimal these days, but he wanted to be here, which is great. And so many people have often asked me, who is Guy Thomas? Well, it's not this man, who's this? No, it's good to have Guy here. Guy was the author of Free Capital, and how many of you have read Free Capital? Wow, quite a lot. Excellent. I haven't got a clue who all those people were in it, though, Guy. And apparently you can't tell anyone anyway, so there we go. The secret will be kept. But Free Capital was a book that most people were intrigued to learn all the different strategies that people had used to make their millions. Some probably claim to have $1 million, but started with 10 million, so they were cheating, huh?
That's a different book.
How to lose $1 million. So he has an interesting angle on quite a lot of things that came up in Free Capital. But the key is, once you've made it, do you really want to spend all that time making another million or making more money? Some of us want to have a bit more time on our hands. Maybe we want to do different things. I know we all enjoy investing, but there is a life after investing. Anyway, Guy's going to tell us a little bit more about Free Capital and tell us how to choose fund managers as well, which is interesting. Okay, over to you, Guy.
Okay, testing, 1 million, 2 million, hear me at the back? Yeah, okay, right. Okay, thank you, David, for the introduction. It was quite right that I don't get out and about that much. There is no reputation which requires less maintenance than that of a recluse. But here I am, spoiling my reputation by coming here today. I offer to talk about choosing fund managers because it is something which I have spent quite a bit of time thinking about myself recently. I've been discussing it with friends, and I'd now like to broaden that discussion. Free Capital, my book on the left there, was a book about choosing individual shares. It was about 12 people who went from a 5-figure sum to a 7-figure sum, or sometimes even a bit more, by picking individual shares. And I in no way renounce any of that, okay? I still believe everything in Free Capital. I still spend most of my time doing all the stuff in Free Capital, or my bits of Free Capital. But a problem with a lot of the stuff in Free Capital is that it does not scale very well. With a modest amount of money, if you do all the work in Free Capital, you may be able to do better than most fund managers. But as you get more money, you need more ideas. That takes more time, and your later ideas are probably less good than your earlier ideas. So eventually you find yourself spending more and more time on investment for less and less of an edge. And although it's fun, I don't want to do it 24 hours a day. 18 hours a day is enough. So eventually it starts to make sense to delegate some of your money, even if you were able to do better than most fund managers when you had a smaller amount of money. So Free Capital, a book about individual shares. There are hundreds of books about picking individual shares, probably thousands. There are not many books about picking fund managers. And I think that's an interesting contrast and a gap which I may eventually get round to trying to fill, depending on whether I can sort out my own ideas first, which I hope you will possibly help me to make progress with today. Okay, by the way, I don't mind comments as I go along, okay? So, throw in things if you like. I'll have hopefully 10 minutes at the end for general comments, but quite happy to take interjections if the mood takes you. Okay, not many books on choosing fund managers. That may be because it's difficult, at least as difficult, I think, as choosing individual shares. And there is a quote from somebody else who thinks it's difficult. Anyone recognize that quote? Yes, very good. That was very, very good audience, obviously. Yes, it's Buffett's. Do you know where in Buffett? No? Anyone know where in Buffett? Not that it matters, but I'm just testing the audience. It's 2016 annual report. So there's Buffett, just 2 years ago, saying over his lifetime, he's only seen 10 or so people that he thought were worth investing in. Now, if Buffett can only find 10, how are we going to find 10? How are we going to find any? It's difficult. I think there are two, very generically, there are two ways of going about this. You can look at the numbers, you can look at performance records, and you can look at the words. You can look at what people say and also what they do. And the difficulty with the numbers is nicely illustrated by the case of Bill Miller, a very well-known US value investor, who had this fantastic record for 15 years, not just outperforming over the 15 years, but outperforming in every year. So in 2005, you might have thought that was a pretty good record to put your money in. Unfortunately, you would then have been dead last of all the funds in his category over the next 5 years. So you start to think, did it mean anything in 2005? Well, we can't prove that it didn't mean anything, but we can ask the question, if all outperformance and underperformance is random, how likely is it we will see some records like that? And you need to be very careful how you frame this. The simplest calculation is just to raise 0.5 to the power 15, which gives that very small number on the top right. But that framing is equivalent to saying we have a time machine. We take ourselves back to 1991 and we're asked to pick one manager who's going to outperform every year in the next 15 years. And if everything's random, it's very unlikely we can do that. A better framing is to say we're standing in 2005. Is there any manager who will have had this outstanding record of the last 15 years outperforming in every year? And on that framing, the probability is still small, but it's no longer negligible. But even that's not really what we're doing. What we're really doing is we're standing in 2005 saying, impress me. Are there any records which impress us? And we don't really care which 15-year period it was. We actually don't care there's 15 years, 14 years, we're just as impressive. So on that framing, it starts to become more likely than not that there will be some records out there which are extremely impressive. And if you think this is an entirely freakish example, well, there is BlackRock Smaller Companies Trust I was just looking at the other day in the UK, which has that record of outperforming every year in the last 15 years. But does it mean anything? It's a hard problem. So, okay, if the numbers are no good or numbers are not conclusive, how about we look at what people say and what they do? Well, there is a whole industry of doing this for institutions, mainly actuaries originally, but now lots of people. Unfortunately, the academic literature on these people basically says their selections are no use. There is even some evidence in the academic literature that it would be better to pick investment managers who've done badly recently than to pick ones who've done well. Now, not many consultants recommend that because it's hard to say to your clients, here's a manager who's done really crappy over the past 5 years, invest in them. I think that the reason for that is probably that, or possibly, that consultants do identify skill, but when they identify skill and they recommend the firm, a lot of money then goes to that firm. So the skill is swamped. The edge of the firm degrades with the extra money. So following recommendations, following people who write on recommending fund managers is problematical as well. So if it's all problematical, should we just index? Well, I don't have a strong argument against this. Okay, perhaps I should end the talk here. You can index the whole world pretty cheaply, own the world. You can index developed markets even cheaper. So perhaps we should do that. But what if we want to try and do something better than that? Well, that gets on to the meat of my talk. I have got some probably idiosyncratic principles there, which are partly to do with my own needs and compulsions. But I'm going to go through those now and hopefully get some further ideas from you. Is that okay so far? Anyone want to? I don't mean that list, but I mean all the stuff so far. Yeah, okay. Right, okay, well that's principles under sort of general headings. First principle, diversification, may seem, too obvious to even talk about. Everyone knows you diversify. But there are many dimensions to diversification, some of which are much more thought about than others. The first line there is what everyone thinks about. Different countries, different instruments, equities, bonds, etc., different strategies, value, growth, momentum. And you should certainly diversify, in that dimension. I tend to think about this diversification not as spreading risk, but as ways of getting sources of return I don't want to do myself. So I am mainly a value investor or a fundamental investor. There are some strategies, growth, momentum, where I can see the evidence that they work in certain periods, but I don't really want to do it myself. I don't want to see how that sausage is made. So for those, I'm happier to get somebody else to do it, so I don't have to sort of pollute my own process. So that's the sort of diversification everyone thinks about. But another dimension of diversification is custody risk. Now, this is on people's minds because of Beaufort, but perhaps in 6 or 12 months it'll be off people's minds again. I have always thought about this a lot. That's why I've got a Crest account. Most of us have a substantial part of our assets in ISAs and SIPs. I do as well. I have to use nominees for those. But I certainly use a Crest account where I can. And where this comes in for using other managers is that by using another manager, you can do something entirely separate from your own activities. So you have different custody structure, even a different countries system. So diversification in that dimension gives you some robustness against custody disasters. And that idea of robustness itself has more dimensions. Now, when I talk about robustness, you possibly start to think of Nassim Taleb and the idea of anti-fragility. Some people read Nassim Taleb's book, Anti-Fragile, about things which gain from disorder. Some. Well, okay, robustness, as I see it, is more limited and less ambitious than anti-fragility. I can illustrate the difference with gold. If you own gold because you think that the world is going to go bad, and when the world goes bad, you will make a killing by owning gold, then that's anti-fragility. That's planning to gain from disorder. But on the other hand, if you own gold because gold does not depend on any ledger system, and gold is portable, you can keep it at home, you can carry it across borders, then that's robustness. That's saying not that I'm going to make a killing, but that I'll still have something left if the world goes to hell. Now, there are other ways of expressing that idea. Perhaps you should own a farm. Okay, if the world goes to hell, you own a farm, and it's well defended. You can still eat if the world goes bad. I actually think about that one a lot. We are always 4 meals away from anarchy. It's a serious issue. I don't know. I'm afraid I own a farm, and I don't own any gold, but I do own fund managers with different forms of robustness. So some of my fund managers have very robust operational infrastructures. They have lots of backups. They have multiple prime brokers. They have thought a lot about what they'll do if key man leaves, and they've thought about all that. That's one type of robustness. Other firms I have investments with are too small to have that sort of robustness, but they're robust because what they're doing is fairly simple. They are smart people who are not trying to be too clever. And so if their broker couldn't trade for them for a month, then it wouldn't matter very much because they're basically doing something fairly static and simple. So I try to achieve robustness. I try to avoid the Noah school of investing. This is another Buffettism. The Noah school is where you have two of everything. Okay? I don't want two of everything. I don't even want two of anything, really. I don't want unnecessary duplication. Or if I do have two managers following a similar strategy, I want it to be because it achieves some other form of diversification, like custody diversification or robustness diversification. So I don't want two of everything. I probably don't want things which overlap with my own activities. So I'm not very interested in small cap equity fund managers, because that's what I do myself. So that's some of the dimensions of diversification. Is that okay? Any comments or suggestions there? Okay. Right. Okay. Well, next group of issues under the heading of general heading of understanding. Okay. It's good for fund managers to be transparent. By transparent, I don't necessarily mean what are the individual holdings. That's interesting to know, and nice if they can tell you. But more than the individual holdings, which will change over time, I want the process to be transparent. And I give you an example of this, the good transparency. One of the funds I am involved with is Bronte Capital, the Australian hedge fund run by John Hempton. And for about 8 years, John wrote a blog, a very detailed blog, more about his shorts than his longs. But the blog meant that I was able to follow his thinking in real time. I didn't actually read it for 8 years, but I read all 8 years before I invested with him. And so I was able to see in a great deal of detail how he thought and think, hey, this guy actually thinks in a reasonably similar way to me, but he's investing in different markets, and he's clearly smarter than me, and he's more dedicated than me. So that was started to be something which looked worth investing in. Now, if it's transparent, then hopefully we can understand it because it's transparent. But if it's understandable, then there's a slight paradox of why don't we do it ourselves? Well, there's the issue of time, which I already touched on. But as well as that, I particularly look for things which I can understand, but which are either unattainable for me to do myself or which are unpalatable for me to do myself. Now, I touched earlier on the idea of don't really want to do growth investing myself, but the Bronte is a more specific example. The Bronte long portfolio is very vanilla. It's long, large cap equities all over the world, and I could do that myself. But their short portfolio is short 200 fads, frauds, and failures all over the world. Okay, and they short these mainly by affinity. They don't look at the accounts. They're not interested in the stories. They just look for bad people, brokers, PR men, lawyers, and when they find somebody who is involved in some sort of scam, they stick them in their database, and when they see them again, they short them in very small size. And some of the things they short, they go up 10 times, some of them, but because they're very small size, that's okay. On the whole, they tend to go down, at least so far. That's a strategy which I've seen enough of on AIM. I've seen enough scams to see how it could work. But I don't want to myself go and be short 200 stocks all over the world because the logistics are immense. And I actually don't want to spend all my time thinking about scams. It's a disagreeable way of making a living. So I'm really happy to pay Bronte to do that and not have to do it myself. And I look for people who are doing something which I can understand, but I don't want to do myself. Capacity limits. Okay, it's very important to understand this yourself and also for the manager to understand and act on it. Virtually all strategies degrade with increasing assets under management. The manager's edge gets lower the more money he has. So you want a manager who is willing to close to new money when the fund gets to a certain size. Of course, if you're investing, it's not close to new money, so you've got to rely on what they say. But as it happens, Bronte, again, they have no close to new money, so they follow through on what they said. that is something well worth thinking about, which often is not sort of mentioned by the managers themselves. Okay, any comments on that? Yeah.
Just explain why.
Just explain why.
Well, in answer to the last point you made.
Yeah. Oh, why strategies degrade? Well, in general, most strategies, there's only a certain amount of capacity in the market to find situations like the one which the manager is making money from. So if you're short fads and frauds all over the world, there are only a certain number of fads and frauds at any one time. There's only 200 million worth of fads and frauds to be short of. If everyone starts following that strategy, it will no longer work because there are too many people essentially getting in front of you and moving the price before you do it. So it's just really a market liquidity sort of issue. There's not enough liquidity to do strategies in unlimited size. Okay. I hope Bronte does okay now that I've mentioned them 2 or 3 times. That's my favourite investment. Okay, costs. Costs are certain, like the old saying about death and taxes. The main costs are fees and taxes. I am not necessarily looking for the lowest fees. If I was, I'd be indexing. I want, though, to understand the fees, particularly some subtleties which people don't talk about very much. The first one there relates to performance fees. If you have a performance fee, say 20% of performance, perhaps above some hurdle rate or 20% of the whole outperformance, it matters how often that is measured. If it's measured every 3 months or every 6 months, that's worth more to the manager than if it's measured every 12 months or every 5 years. So the sequence of repeating options for the manager is worth more than the single long-dated option. Second one is some private equity managers particularly have this awful fee structure where it's a performance fee, but it's on the individual underlying investments. So if some of the investments do well, some do badly, and overall the fund goes nowhere, you still end up paying performance fees on the investments that did well. So that's where the manager effectively has a portfolio of options, which is always worth more than an option on the whole portfolio. The last one there, I'll go into it. High water mark is where the manager has to reach, when he's reached a certain level and earned a performance fee on that, he has to go above that level before there are any more performance fees. So if the fund goes from 100 to 110 and the fees are 1% and 20% of the performance, and that's a fee of 3, but then is the new high water mark the 110, or is it the amount after the fee, 107? It's usually the latter because that's better for the manager, because he then earns another performance fee when he goes up from 107. But it'd be better for you if it was the 110. So it's worth understanding. And there are other issues like that which don't get talked about much in the fee headlines, but it's worth understanding. Okay, taxes. I don't actually want to minimize taxes either, same as not minimize fees. My aim in life is to pay a lot of taxes, create as much revenue for the Treasury as I can, but at the lowest rates and the latest times which the rules will allow. And that idea of the latest times is why a fund can be valuable, because with most types of funds, you're deferring CGT until you sell your interest in the fund. So even if the fund manager is not quite as good as you pre-tax, you can still end up doing better in the fund because you defer the tax for many years. If you're looking at offshore open-ended funds, then you want something called reporting fund status, which means that the income is reported to HMRC every year and you pay tax on that income. You then pay income tax. Then at the end, when you sell the fund, you pay capital gains tax on your gain. If you don't have that reporting fund thing, and it's an offshore fund, then when you come to sell it, you will pay income tax on the whole gain, which for most people would be worse. So that's worth noticing. Okay, last group of principles, simplicities. I look for economies of intelligence. That means things I only have to get right once. I don't want funds where I have to keep making decisions. I don't want funds where I have to keep monitoring them to pull my money out at the right time. I want decisions which I can make and then leave. And so that rules out certain types of fund, rules out very sort of racy strategies. I also look for low maintenance investments. I guess this is sort of related to economies of intelligence, but there's some slightly different aspects to it. Low maintenance investments, meaning things I don't need to do further work on in future. By delegating some of my money, I am trying to create time assets for myself. I am trying to avoid time debts, and especially contingent debts. And by contingent debts, I mean investments which I make now, and it doesn't take too much time now, but later it's going to blow up into something which needs a lot of work. And just digressing slightly, that point about contingent debts is a reason why I am no longer very involved in startups, rescues, private companies, even placings. I don't really want to do much of any of these because I don't want contingent debts. I don't want things which are quick now, but which blow up in future. If they blow up and then you just lose your money, that's one thing. But what has happened is they blow up into something you've got to do a lot of activism on. I've done activism. I am capable of doing activism. I just don't want to do more of it than I have to. So I'm trying to avoid contingent debts. And I try to practice smart naivety. By that I mean looking for things which are simple and obvious. The best investments are usually staring us in the face. Okay, I talked earlier about a hedge fund, but a hedge fund really is not going to be my best investment. My best investment is probably going to be something simpler, and I do have some much simpler ones. Okay, so I look for economies of intelligence. I look for low maintenance investments. I try to practice smart naivety. Sounds like I don't have that much going on. Yeah, exactly. Okay? That is my final message for you today. And I don't mean boring in the sense of not interesting. I mean boring in the sense of uneventful, unremarkable, not requiring too much attention, trying to avoid big mistakes, not trying to shoot the lights out. I am looking for fund investments which are boring. I like them to do well as well too, of course, but often the ones which are boring are the ones which do the best. So those are my principles. I was really hoping to get some other principles, suggestions for books or other resources. Those are my very limited suggestions for books. Would you like to give me some other suggestions or principles or... Hi.
Let me just make a comment on the fund management industry and see whether this is a factor which you would take into account. What I've observed is that the increasing demands on managers to invest in technology and also to respond to compliance and the burden of compliance and the cost of compliance means that they're having to change their strategies, their processes. They're having to scale up often to cover the costs of those two factors. And everything you've said has been fascinating and very interesting, but if you were to turn it around from the perspective of the fund manager, they of course are sort of fighting a battle. They have been fighting a battle in the last 10 years against those 2 points and others that you've mentioned. And so they're trying to kind of meet investors' requirements, but also run their own businesses. And I wonder whether you see it changing, whether you see the opportunities to pick good fund managers being influenced by those factors.
Okay, that's a very very useful way of sort of, invert the problem, think about it from the other sort of side's perspective. That's a very useful way of thinking about many problems. Yeah, I am certainly aware of the issue that managers need a certain scale to cover their operational costs. And I have actually said to some managers, I really want your business to be minimally successful. I want you to be just successful enough that you carry on in terms of assets under management. I really don't want you to be bigger than you need to. And I recognize, I say to the managers, that this is in some ways conflicts with your own interests and agenda, that you would like to have more assets under management to meet those costs and to make a decent living for yourself. I think that perhaps one way of finessing that is to, I'm afraid from the client's perspective, is to look for managers, and perhaps this also works from the manager's perspective potentially, is to look for managers or to be a manager who, in some sense, is not doing it just for the money, is doing it for the intellectual satisfaction of having a good performance record, rather than just for making as much money as possible in 5 or 10 years. Because if you want to make as much money as possible in 5 or 10 years as a manager, you just go for scale. You go for assets under management. But I would like to find people who are interested in developing a good record. And I have some funds who are quite explicit. They are people in their 40s or 50s, and they say, I hope to be doing this for the next 30 or 40 years. So they have a sort of a different aim in life from getting as rich as they can, as quickly as they can. That's hard to find in somebody who is in investment and running money, but that's that rarity is worth looking for. Hello.
Do you think that with the ever increasing sort of pace of change and the scale of change, any investment strategy could possibly have any sort of degree of sustainability to it?
That's a very good question, and if I can just express that in my own way, our strategy is becoming less sustainable. Is the lifetime of strategies becoming shorter? Quite possibly, it is. I guess the argument that strategies are becoming less sustainable is, I guess, it's similar to the argument that companies are becoming less sustainable, in the sense that moats around companies, the Buffett idea of a moat around a company, the sort of defensive position, moats are becoming less sustainable because of the rate of technical change. And that seems a plausible argument. The only drawback with that argument is that sort of argument has been made at every market top. It's always made. Perhaps strategies are less sustainable, and perhaps that, to some degree, that makes more difficult my search for something which is durable and which I don't need to think about all the time. But it's a very good question, which I haven't really successfully answered, but it's one to think about.
It's going to be difficult for you to answer this, I suppose. But what level of capital do you think you have to be at before free capital becomes difficult and trusting your money to other people becomes sensible?
As soon as you get into 8 figures. There's nothing wrong with doing it sooner, of course, but 8 figures, it starts to become a very big issue, even low 8 figures.
Also a function of things like age and health.
Yes, undoubtedly, it's a function of those sort of things. Also a function of what your strategy is. I am very much microcaps. I have nothing in the FTSE 350. It is rare for me to have a company with a market cap over 200 million. So that is a big factor in my liquidity constraints. But something I'm conscious of when I read other people commenting on investments on bulletin boards, which by the way I spend a lot of time doing. Okay, I do not diss bulletin boards. I read bulletin boards all the time. But when I read bulletin boards, I am often conscious that a lot of the people are almost playing a different game to me. And the reason they're playing a different game is they're playing the game with a smaller amount of money. And so they can do things which I can't do anymore. And occasionally you even see comments to the effect of, why is Guy Thomas still in this thing? He must be stupid, why hasn't he sold it? Well, the answer is he's got too much to sell sometimes. I would love to go back to the good old days, but didn't have much money. So, so savor it while you can. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for sharing your thoughts. But the previous speaker hinted at it. I think the strategy which is best depends upon the individual circumstances of that person. You've described the strategies which you feel are appropriate to you, but I think people in a different position in life, be it in terms of age or whether they're working. I mean, I don't know you at all, so I guess your profile is that you are retired and have as much time as you want to spend on it. And from what you're saying, one of your issues is how you spend that time and the amount you devote to investing. And you've described how you've addressed that. But other people have got completely different positions in life, and therefore just at that level they need a totally different strategy from the one you described, in my view.
That I'm sure is true. I should have sort of put myself in sort of different situations. I'm sure it's true that if you're working full time, then you have a very different agenda of what works for you. And also, I think even beyond your situation, there are issues around your own personality. Free Capital, my earlier book about investing yourself, was largely about this. It was about the differences in people's personalities and how that fitted with their strategy. And you found people with different personalities, even amongst people all who were basically doing investment full time. They had very different strategies depending on their own personality. So circumstances, personality, probably other things as well would make a big difference to what strategy would make sense. Yeah.
I think last question. I think
that's something I need to think about for a book. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Who are some great managers in your view, and what can I learn from them?
Okay, I thought somebody might ask this. Okay, I've mentioned Bronte. I have an investment in Metropolis Capital. Metropolis, small London fund, only about 100 million under management, mainly large cap equity, so there's no capacity issue. They are very much the sort of the Buffett sort of the Buffett sort of catechism. I think they're impressive. Who do we have after that? I have an investment in a Montanaro equity fund, but that's only because it's on a low fee, which is that fee class is now closed, so that's no good. And apart from that, I just have I have several fairly well-known. I don't know well now. I have several investment trusts. So I have Scottish Oriental. Of Genesis Emerging Markets. I'm quite keen on emerging markets in the last couple of years. I may be able to give you more names privately when I get my brain in gear, but that's some off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Great. Oh, well, I hope you all enjoyed that session. I don't think it's any secret, really, that I was one of the characters in Free Capital, so I'm not really revealing anything. I was in it. But when Guy came over to interview me, one of my children, who's actually here, my youngest daughter, said, "Why on earth does he want you in a book?" So I said, "I haven't got a clue." And then when I said it's going to be called Free Capital, said, "Oh, get some of that, Dad, if it's free." Oh, well. Anyway, well done, Guy. Thank you for giving us that talk, and hope you all enjoyed it. Thanks.